Welcome to the American Nephrology Nurses Association's 50th Anniversary podcast series. In this commemorative series, past presidents and other leaders of the American Nephrology Nurses Association will provide a rich history of the association itself and of nephrology nursing as a specialty nursing profession. The American Nephrology Nurses Association's 50th Anniversary podcast series is brought to you by the Nephrology Nursing Journal, the official journal of the American Nephrology Nurses Association. We are honored to present this episode, and we hope you enjoy these invaluable and enlightening nephrology nursing recollections.
Hi, my name is Beth Ulrich. I'm the editor of the Nephrology Nursing Journal and a past president of AANNT. Today it is my honor to interview Marty Orr, who served as president of AANNT in 1975 and 1976. Marty, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today about nephrology nursing.
I'm thrilled to be asked. It's an exciting project, and everyone involved is to be congratulated.
So let's start at the beginning of your nephrology nursing career. When and how did you become a nephrology nurse, and what was your first nephrology nursing job?
Actually, it's very interesting to me, at least. I was working as a adjunct faculty member for the Emory University School of Medicine at Grady Hospital on their brand new community health center. It was not a very successful position for me, mostly because the medical students were not happy with having a nurse instructor. When I had an opportunity to go see about this position as a nurse clinician in the brand new nephrology center, I jumped on it, and I could not have been happier. It was a wonderful job. I was right there at the beginning of transplant nursing in its earliest stages. It was all the controversies and the difficulties of the who shall live and who shall die movements. I really did learn a lot, and that's how I got started.
Did you have to serve on, or were you in an institution that had the God committees, as some called them at the time?
Yes, I was.
What was that experience like?
It was exceedingly painful because the reason there was such a thing was that at that time, living-related donor transplants were not accepted. It had to be a cadaver donor. And, of course, there were very few cadaver donors. So there was a scarcity involved and a multiple number of people that needed kidneys to be transplanted. So that was a very painful job. I remember specifically the issue of a prisoner who needed a transplant and the arguments that just because he was a prisoner didn't mean he had received a death sentence and that he should get the kidney. But there was a child waiting for one. And we had to debate that one extensively. It was really painful, Beth.
I'm sure, and I'm really happy we don't have to do that anymore.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's a time that we need to remember as we look at resourcing in nursing and healthcare as we go into the future, that these things can happen.
Yep.
Tell me about the early years of the association and the years when you were president. What was going on in nephrology and nephrology nursing and AANNT, for that matter?
Big question. This was a time of very rapid technological change in dialysis and transplant. When I started, we had only external AV shunts. There was no such thing as a fistula. When I started, we were building dialyzers out of membranes that were clamped between a frame and filled with formalin to disinfect them and then pressurized. They were very easy to break, so it was difficult technically to dialyze people, and dialysis typically took a good bit longer than it does today, which made patients unhappy, and of course a dialyzer breaking was a traumatic event too, with much blood loss. So the technical issues in dialysis were really changing a lot, as were the issues in transplant, because it wasn't too long before the policy on no living donor transplant was dealt with by ethics committees and decided that they would go for a living donor transplant. The argument being that you didn't want to do a transplant from a living donor and possibly injure that person's health. So that was a big issue at that time. By the time I left nephrology for my new job, it wasn't an issue anymore. I think that the ethicists kind of worked through that. And as for AANN, That last letter T was the big issue for me, for many of us at that time. We just didn't know what to do with the technicians who wanted to be a part of our organization. They were not licensed. In many cases, they were trained on the job, so they didn't have any formal training. And many nurses involved in dialysis and transplant did not want to feel themselves responsible for the practice of the technicians. So we had 2 or 3 years of arguing over whether technicians should remain in the association, and finally decided that they should not, that it should be all nurses, which is a decision that I think was at the time very correct. Having decided that technicians needed their own organization, it took several years, but we really did decide that it needed to be all nurses. And that was a decision that I felt was entirely appropriate.
Were there other challenges that you saw during that time that you thought were important?
Yes, there were. You know, you have to look at what the purpose of the organization was. And in my opinion, it was providing timely and relevant education to as many nephrology nurses as we possibly could. We were trying to do outreach, and it was succeeding. We were growing pretty rapidly, and we needed to provide education in as many forums as we could, locally and nationally. And, of course, we started our professional journal at that time as well. And then, of course, once we put our fingers in that many pots, we really did agree that we needed professional management. And that was I think that might have been a couple of years before I was president. But in any event, we did employ an organizational management person. That was a big change for us because it put us into an employer-employee relationship and spent a fair amount of money on that.
When I was talking to Lois Bernbeck yesterday, she said at the time she was president, and probably at least at the beginning of the time you were president, that the national office was the president's house.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And, of course, we really needed to deal with record keeping and collection of dues and banking of dues and that kind of thing. It just became clear that we needed to move to the next level.
So, Marty, after your presidency, you served as executive director for the New York State Nurses Association. How did your experience as president of AANNT influence your work in that role?
First of all, it influenced my acceptance of the role. I was not eager to leave my practice because I really loved taking care of patients. But having served as president of AANNT, I learned the value of nurses working together on behalf of other nurses. So I learned that we brought peer information and peer support to each other, as well as information and more formal learning. We created a community of interest. So I knew what we could do when nurses worked together on behalf of other nurses. So that is why I decided to take the job. And it was extremely helpful to me as I became executive director and had to learn to be the employee of the board of directors, employer of the staff. And so that was an interesting position to be in, and one that challenged every little bit of professionalism and learning that I could acquire.
It is a big change.
Definitely is. Being accountable to a board of directors while trying to be the principal manager of an organization is definitely not the easiest job in the world.
Certainly a challenge. What are some of your favorite nephrology nursing memories or association-related memories you have?
Oh, the annual conferences with ASAIO. It was a time of bonding for us, all of us in the early stages. You know, I can clearly remember Bernice Hinckley, that time of bonding because it was new, it was different, it was a new organization, it was obviously very needed and very helpful. Those annual conferences were truly special. Not to mention the fact that they are always held in lovely places and our employers generally paid for us to go.
Yeah, not so much that anymore sometimes, but...
Yeah, I think probably not so much anymore.
But I agree. Those times to come together at the conferences were certainly very special. It's why we always list the conference site with the past president names for AANNT, because everybody remembers the conference site, and they can attune to what year it was by what city they were in.
Absolutely.
So before we go, what short message or thought regarding either nephrology nursing, past, present, or future, or the association, would you like to share with our listeners?
A really important one. My stepdaughter was considering going into nursing, and we had lengthy discussions about what the central and most important role of nurses is in caring for people with chronic disease of any kind, and in my case, chronic kidney disease. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought that that central role is terribly important, because the physicians can only do so much. They can diagnose and treat, but it is the nurses who teach patients how to live with the disease and who support them on a daily basis often in coping with the demands of dialysis or trying to learn what they needed to do with a transplant and coping with the side effects of the transplant. I always knew that nephrology nurses made a major difference in the life of patients, and it was a source of great pride to me that I was a part of that.
Well, Marty, I want to thank you for your service and leadership as president of AANNT and for letting us interview you today. We very much appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
You're very welcome. I look forward to seeing you soon.
The American Nephrology Nurses Association's 50th anniversary podcast series is brought to you by the Nephrology Nursing Journal, the official journal of the American Nephrology Nurses Association. This series is owned and produced by the American Nephrology Nurses Association. All rights reserved. No portion of this podcast may be used without written permission. For archived episodes of this podcast and to learn more about the American Nephrology Nurses Association, visit the association's website at annanurse.org. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, our hosting site Spreaker, and other various podcast delivery services.